world was changing. The winds of time had swept across the lands of Egypt, where a people once bound by chains were now free. For generations, the Israelites had lived under the harsh rule of Pharaoh, slaves in the land of Egypt, their cries for deliverance lost in the noise of their suffering. But God had heard their cries. God had remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He had seen the misery of his people, and he had come to deliver them. Through a man named Moses, a man once raised in the house of Pharaoh but called to a greater purpose, the Israelites were led out of Egypt. The miraculous parting of the Red Sea, the plagues that struck Egypt, the devastation of Pharaoh's mighty army, all of these were signs of God's power, a power that could not be denied. The people of Israel were weary. They had walked for days through the wilderness, the harsh desert sun beating down on them relentlessly. The journey from Egypt had been long and exhausting, and the path ahead seemed endless. Their lives had been marked by hardship, slavery, and oppression under the hand of Pharaoh. But now, after the great deliverance from Egypt, they stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, uncertain of what the future would bring. Moses had climbed the mountain before, but this time he was not alone. The Lord had told him to bring the people to the foot of the mountain, to consecrate themselves, for God was going to speak directly to them. And so Moses had led the people in preparation, cleansing their hearts, purifying themselves, and setting themselves apart for what was about to unfold. The mountain began to shake. The people looked up in fear as thunder rumbled from the clouds and lightning flashed across the sky. The sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder, filling the air with a sound of great power. The ground trembled beneath them as the voice of God began to speak from the mountain. The voice was like the roar of many waters, powerful and commanding. The people trembled in fear, their hearts gripped with awe and terror. Moses, standing before the Lord, bowed his head and listened intently as God began to speak. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage," the voice boomed. "You shall have no other gods before me." Moses' heart raced. He had heard God's voice before, but never in such a powerful and majestic way. This was the voice that spoke creation into existence, the voice that parted the Red Sea, the voice that had given him the courage to confront Pharaoh. And now, this same voice was speaking directly to him and the people. "I am a jealous God," the voice continued, "visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." Moses knew that these words were not just for him, but for all the people. God was establishing his covenant with them, a covenant that would shape their lives and their relationship with him. The 10 Commandments were not just a list of rules. They were the foundation of a holy relationship between God and his people. The voice of God thundered again, saying, "You shall not make for yourselves a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." Moses stood silent as the weight of these words sank in. The people trembled at the sound of God's voice. They were being called to a higher standard, to a life that was set apart from the world. No longer would they be slaves to Pharaoh. They were now servants of the Most High God. "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain," the voice of God continued, "for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." Moses felt the weight of these words as well. God's name was holy, sacred, and to be respected. The people were not to use his name lightly, but to honor and revere it. This was a call to purity of speech, to integrity, and to a life lived in reverence to the Almighty. "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy," the voice of God declared. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, You, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Moses was struck by the significance of the Sabbath commandment. It was not just a day of rest, it was a day of worship, a time set apart to honor the Creator of the heavens and the earth. In a world filled with ceaseless work and striving, God was calling His people to stop, to reflect, and to honor Him. The Sabbath was a gift, a reminder that God was their provider, and that they could trust Him with their time, their energy, and their lives. Honor your father and your mother, the voice continued, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Moses reflected on the importance of honoring parents. This commandment was foundational to maintaining peace and harmony within the family and the community. It was a call to respect authority and to live in harmony with the structure God had ordained for society. You shall not murder, the voice said, and Moses bowed even lower, understanding the depth of this commandment. Life was sacred to God, and He was calling His people to value and protect the lives of others, to live with love and compassion toward their fellow man. You shall not commit adultery, God declared. Marriage was a holy institution, a covenant between a man and a woman, and it was to be protected and honored. Fidelity was a reflection of God's faithfulness to His people. You shall not steal, came the voice, deep and authoritative. The act of stealing was not just a violation of property, it was an affront to God's provision and trust. The people were to be honest in all their dealings, to respect the possessions and rights of others. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, the voice continued. Truth was sacred to God. Lying, slander, and gossip were forbidden. The people were to be people of integrity, known for their honesty and truthfulness. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. The final commandment was a call to contentment, a reminder that God had provided for each person according to His will. Covetousness would lead to envy, strife, and division. God wanted His people to live in peace with one another, to rejoice in what they had, and to trust in His provision. Moses stood in silence as the voice of God echoed across the mountain. The thunder, the lightning, the sound of the trumpet, it all ceased as the voice of God finished speaking. The people of Israel stood below, trembling in fear and awe. Moses' heart swelled with gratitude. The Lord had spoken directly to them, revealing His will for their lives. He had given them a path to walk, a covenant to follow. It was a call to holiness, a call to live in a way that reflected God's character and glory. The people, still trembling with fear, turned to Moses. He was their leader, the one who had brought them out of Egypt. But now he was more than just a leader. He was the mediator between them and God. Moses looked down at the people and spoke with authority and compassion. Do not be afraid, Moses said, for God has come to test you, that the fear of Him may be before you, that you may not sin. Moses, standing before the people, felt a heavy weight upon his shoulders. The 10 Commandments were not just rules for the Israelites. They were a divine covenant, a sacred agreement between God and His chosen people. They were to be the foundation of their relationship with Him. As Moses looked at the trembling faces of the people, he knew the importance of this moment. It was a turning point in the history of Israel, a moment that would shape their future. These commandments, Moses began, these are the words of the living God, given to us directly. They are not just for today or tomorrow, but for all generations. We are called to follow them, not out of fear, but out of love and reverence for the one true God. It is He who delivered us from slavery in Egypt, and it is He who has brought us to this place to make us a holy nation. The people listened intently. Their fear was palpable, but so was the sense of awe. They had seen God's power in the parting of the Red Sea, in the pillar of cloud by day, and the pillar of fire by night. They had witnessed his mighty acts of deliverance, but now they were being called into a deeper relationship with him. God was not just their deliverer, he was their king, their lawgiver, their guide. Moses raised his hands, and the people fell silent, waiting for him to speak once more. God has given us these commandments not to oppress us, but to protect us. He desires that we live in peace, that we honor one another, and that we honor him. For in honoring God and his laws, we will experience true freedom and life. The commandments are a gift, a guide to living as a people who are holy and set apart. Moses began to walk among the people, his voice growing stronger with each word. Let us begin with the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. The crowd was still, the weight of these words heavy upon their hearts. For so long they had lived in a land surrounded by pagan idols, by false gods and empty worship. Now God was declaring his supremacy. There would be no room for other gods in their hearts. God alone is worthy of our worship, Moses continued. No idol, no false god can compare to him. He alone is the creator, the sustainer, the provider. We are to love him with all our hearts, all our souls, and all our minds. There is no other God but him. As Moses spoke these words, the Israelites reflected on their past. They had been surrounded by Egyptian gods and idols, but now they were called to abandon all that. The Israelites had been freed not only from physical slavery, but from spiritual bondage as well. Their hearts were to be turned toward God alone. Do not allow anything to take the place of God in your life, Moses warned. Not money, not power, not relationships. Whatever occupies the first place in your heart becomes your God, and God will not share his glory with anyone or anything. Moses' words sank deep into the hearts of the people. They could feel the weight of the commandment, knowing how easy it was to drift away from the true worship of God. The second commandment, Moses said, is to make no carved images or idols. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for the Lord your God is a jealous God. This was another challenge for the Israelites. They had lived in a culture where idol worship was common, where gods were represented by images made by human hands. But now they were called to worship the invisible, sovereign God who could not be contained or represented by anything in creation. You shall not create an image to represent me, God had said, for I am above and beyond any image you could make. I am the eternal, the unchangeable. My presence is everywhere, and you are to worship me in spirit and truth. As Moses spoke these words, the people were reminded of the golden calf they had once made while waiting for Moses on the mountain. They knew how easily they could fall into the temptation of creating a tangible representation of God. But God was calling them to trust in his invisible presence, to worship him without needing to see him. Moses continued, "This commandment is a call to purity of worship. It's a call to worship the true God in spirit and truth, not through rituals or images, but through the condition of your heart." Moses now addressed the third commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The people of Israel had witnessed firsthand the power of God's name. His name was sacred, holy, and filled with authority. It was the name that parted the Red Sea, the name that caused the walls of Jericho to fall, the name that had delivered them from bondage. Do not use God's name casually, Moses warned. Do not speak it in vain as though it were just another word. His name is to be revered and honored. It carries power, it carries authority, and it carries holiness. Moses paused, knowing how important this commandment was for the people. Let your speech reflect your reverence for God. Do not take his name lightly, and do not use it in anger, in deceit, or in any way that dishonors him. The fourth commandment was one of rest. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Moses explained the significance of this commandment, emphasizing the importance of rest. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. God himself rested on the seventh day after creating the heavens and the earth, and he has given us the Sabbath as a gift, a day of rest and worship. The Israelites had been in the wilderness for some time now, and their lives had been filled with constant work and struggle, but now they were called to rest, to pause, and to reflect on the goodness of God. On the Sabbath you are to cease from your labor, Moses said. It is a day set apart for worship, for reflection, and for honoring God. It is a reminder that we do not live by our own strength, but by the provision of God. He is our sustainer, and on this day we acknowledge that he is enough. Moses continued to walk among the people as he spoke, his voice filled with conviction and passion. "Honor your father and your mother," Moses declared, "that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." This commandment emphasized the importance of family and honoring those in authority. "Your parents are a gift from God," Moses said. "By honoring them, you honor God, respect their wisdom, follow their guidance, and cherish the family structure that God has established." The Israelites were reminded of their own families, of the parents who had raised them in a time of slavery. They were called to respect their elders, to value the wisdom that had been passed down through the generations. "You shall not murder," Moses said, his voice filled with gravitas. "Life is sacred to God, and you are to protect and preserve it." The people stood still, reflecting on the sanctity of life. In a world filled with violence and oppression, they were called to be a people who honored life, a people who lived in peace with one another. Moses reminded them of the importance of love and compassion toward their neighbors. "You shall not commit adultery," Moses continued. "Marriage is a sacred covenant between a man and a woman. It is a reflection of God's covenant with his people." The people of Israel were to uphold the sanctity of marriage, to honor their spouses and remain faithful to them. Adultery was a violation of that sacred bond, and it would disrupt the peace and stability of the community. "You shall not steal," Moses said, "for all that you have comes from God. Do not take what is not yours. Be honest in all your dealings." Integrity and honesty were central to the life of God's people. Stealing was a breach of trust and a violation of God's command to love one's neighbor. Moses called the people to live in peace and fairness, to work hard and to respect the property of others. "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor," Moses declared. "Lying and deceit have no place among God's people." The Israelites were called to truthfulness in all their dealings. Falsehoods and lies would destroy relationships, tear apart communities, and dishonor God. Moses reminded them that their words had power, and they were to use them to build up, not tear down. Finally, Moses spoke on the last commandment, "You shall not covet." The people listened intently as Moses spoke of contentment and trust in God's provision. "Do not covet your neighbor's house, wife, or possessions. Be content with what God has given you. He knows what you need, and he will provide." This commandment was a call to trust in God and be content with his provision. Covetousness led to envy, strife, and discontent, but trusting God's plan for one's life brought peace. As Moses finished speaking the 10 Commandments, the people were filled with awe and fear. They knew that these laws were not mere rules. They were the foundation of their covenant with God. These commandments would shape their identities as a nation, as a people set apart for God's purposes. Moses turned to the people and spoke with deep conviction. "These commandments are not just for today. They are for all time. If you follow them, you will be blessed. If you disobey, there will be consequences. But know this, God is faithful and he will never leave you or forsake you." The journey to Sinai was not just a physical one, but a spiritual one as well. The Israelites had witnessed the mighty works of God, but now they were called to live in a way that honored him in every aspect of their lives. They had seen his power, now they would see his law. They had been saved by his grace, now they would be shaped by his commands. But before the law could be given, the people had to prepare. They had to consecrate themselves, to set themselves apart as a people who were about to receive something holy and divine. They were to purify their hearts and minds, for what they were about to receive was not just a set of laws, but the very words of God himself. God's call for his people to consecrate themselves before receiving the commandments was a reminder that holiness precedes understanding. To truly receive and live by God's law, one must be set apart, purified in heart, and ready to honor him. This same call applies to us today. God desires us to approach his word with reverence and purity. Lord, as we stand at the threshold of a new chapter, help us remember that you have delivered us from the chains of our past. Guide our steps on the path ahead, just as you guided your people through the wilderness. May we listen to your voice and follow your commands. May we trust in your provision, as you alone are our shepherd. Amen.